Hello everyone, this is RachelMaddow. Within the last hour, confirmation has arrived that Russia has taken operational control of approximately $3 billion in Arctic shipping assets. That's billion with a B. And what we're learning about how this happened, why it wasn't stopped, and what it reveals about vulnerabilities in international maritime law is something that changes the entire calculus of Arctic sovereignty. Stay with me on this because the details matter, and they're disturbing. Before we go further, subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear is not being explained clearly anywhere else, and you need to understand what just shifted in the balance of power at the top of the world. Let me start with what we know for certain. According to documents filed with the International Maritime Organization earlier today, a consortium of Russian state-affiliated entities has assumed legal and operational control over 47 vessels currently positioned in Arctic waters. These are not small boats. We're talking about ice-class cargo ships, LNG tankers, and heavy-duty icebreakers. The combined valuation, according to internal assessments obtained from underwriters at Lloyd's of London, is $3.2 billion. That number has been confirmed independently by 3 separate insurance syndicates. Now, here's where it gets complicated. These vessels were not Russian to begin with. They were registered under flags of convenience, primarily Liberia and Panama, and they were owned through a web of shell companies based in Cyprus, the Marshall Islands, and Malta. The actual beneficial owners, according to corporate filings reviewed over the past 6 months, include Norwegian shipping firms, a Danish logistics company, and at least 2 private equity funds headquartered in Luxembourg. So how did Russia end up in control? The mechanism is something called a forced management transfer. It's rare, but it's legal under certain interpretations of international salvage law. What happened, according to a 73-page memorandum released by the Russian Ministry of Transport, is that these vessels became, quote, stranded assets, unquote, after their operators were unable to secure adequate insurance coverage due to Western sanctions. Without insurance, the vessels could not legally dock at most ports. Without port access, they couldn't complete contracted deliveries. And without completing deliveries, the operators defaulted on their financing. Read that again. The sanctions didn't seize the ships. They made the ships commercially inoperable. And under Russian interpretation of maritime law, an inoperable vessel in Arctic waters, particularly one that poses an environmental hazard if abandoned, can be placed under emergency management by the nearest capable authority. In this case, that authority is the Northern Sea Route Administration, which is a division of Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear energy corporation. Yes, the same Rosatom. Let me read you a portion of the official Russian statement, word for word. Quote, "In accordance with Article 12 of the Polar Code and pursuant to established norms governing navigational safety in ice-covered waters, the Russian Federation has assumed temporary custodial management of the affected fleet to prevent ecological disaster and ensure the free flow of commerce along federally maintained shipping lanes." End quote. Temporary custodial management. That phrase is doing a lot of work. Because according to internal communications obtained from one of the Norwegian firms involved, there was no consultation. There was no negotiation. There was a notification sent via encrypted telex at 4 in the morning, Oslo time, informing the company that their vessels were now under Russian operational command and that any attempt to redirect or reclaim them would be treated as a violation of Arctic maritime safety protocols. One executive, whose name is redacted in the documents but whose title is listed as Chief Maritime Officer, wrote back in an email to the company's legal team. Let me read this exactly as it appears. Quote, "We no longer have access to our own transponders. We cannot communicate with the captains. We do not know where the ships are being taken. We have been effectively dispossessed without legal recourse." End quote. That email was dated 11 days ago. It was forwarded to the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was forwarded to the European Commission. It was forwarded to the United States State Department. And as far as we can determine, no formal response has been issued by any of those entities. But it gets worse. According to satellite tracking data provided by an independent maritime intelligence firm based in London, at least 19 of these vessels have already been redirected. They are no longer following their original routes. 7 of them are now heading toward Murmansk. 4 are en route to Norilsk. 3 have been repositioned near Franz Josef Land, which, if you're not familiar, is one of the most strategically sensitive archipelagos in the entire Arctic. It sits directly between Russia and the North Pole, and it has been used historically as a staging ground for both scientific research and military operations. And here's the part that no one expected. 2 of the vessels, both of them large-capacity LNG carriers, were scheduled to deliver liquefied natural gas to terminals in South Korea and Japan. They never arrived. Their transponders went dark for 72 hours. When they came back online, they were off the coast of Sakhalin Island, which is Russian territory in the Far East. The cargo, worth an estimated $430 million, was offloaded at a facility operated by Gazprom. Not once, not twice. This is a pattern. We also now have testimony from a former logistics coordinator who worked with one of the affected shipping companies. This person spoke to investigators under condition of anonymity and provided a sworn statement that was later entered into a preliminary inquiry being conducted by a European Parliament subcommittee on energy security. I'm going to read a portion of that testimony. Quote, "We were told by intermediaries that if we wanted our ships back, we would need to renegotiate our contracts under Russian terms. That meant accepting payment in rubles, agreeing to Russian jurisdictional authority, and waiving any future legal claims. When we refused, we were told the ships would remain in, quote, protective statuses indefinitely," end quote. Protective status. That's the term being used. It sounds bureaucratic. It sounds neutral. But what it means in practice is seizure. It means that $3 billion in maritime assets have been removed from the control of their legal owners and placed under the authority of a foreign government, and it happened without a shot being fired, without a tribunal, and without any meaningful resistance from the international community. Now, let's talk about what this reveals. Because this isn't just about ships, it's about leverage. The Arctic is not some distant, frozen wasteland that doesn't matter. It is one of the most resource-rich regions on the planet. It contains an estimated 13% of the world's undiscovered oil, 30% of its undiscovered natural gas, and vast reserves of rare earth minerals that are essential for everything from smartphones to missile guidance systems. And as the ice continues to recede due to climate change, new shipping routes are opening up that cut transit times between Europe and Asia by nearly 40% compared to traditional routes through the Suez Canal. Whoever controls those routes controls global trade. And right now, Russia is asserting control in a way that no one saw coming. Not through military force, not through diplomatic negotiation, but through creative interpretation of legal gray areas in international maritime law. Think about that. Russia is turning sanctions into leverage. Western governments imposed those sanctions to restrict Russian access to capital and technology. But what actually happened is that those sanctions created a situation where Western companies became unable to operate in Arctic waters, and Russia stepped in to fill the vacuum. The policy designed to weaken them has, in this case, strengthened their strategic position. And here's the other thing. These vessels aren't just sitting idle. According to shipping, manifests obtained through a Freedom of Information request filed by a Norwegian journalist, several of the seized ships have already been reassigned to new contracts. They're now transporting Russian crude oil and liquefied natural gas to buyers in China and India. They're being used to service Russian offshore drilling platforms. They're being deployed to support construction of new port facilities along the Northern Sea Route. In other words, Russia is not holding these ships hostage. Russia is using them. And every day that goes by without a coordinated international response is a day that this becomes harder to reverse. Let me be clear. I'm not making accusations. I'm reading what's in the file. I'm telling you what the documents say. And what they say is that a major transfer of strategic assets has occurred, that it happened largely in silence, and that the implications for Arctic security, for energy markets, and for the enforcement of international law are profound. If this were anyone else, if this were any other region, if this involved any other set of actors, it would be front page news everywhere. But because it's the Arctic, because it involves complex maritime law, because the details are technical and the geography is remote, it's not getting the attention it deserves. But you have to ask why. You have to ask why there has been no emergency session of the UN Security Council. You have to ask why there has been no joint statement from NATO. You have to ask why the companies that lost control of these assets are not pursuing immediate legal action in international court. And the answer, according to multiple sources familiar with the internal discussions, is that no one knows what legal mechanism would actually work. The precedent doesn't exist. The enforcement authority is unclear. And in the absence of clarity, Russia is moving forward. This isn't about one document. It's about behavior. It's about a pattern of testing boundaries, exploiting weaknesses, and taking strategic ground while the rest of the world is still figuring out how to respond. And it's happening right now. So here's what we're watching for. First, whether any of the affected governments issue a formal diplomatic protest. Second, whether any of the companies involved file claims in international arbitration. Third, whether there is any coordinated effort to impose costs on Russia for what has happened. And fourth, whether this emboldens further moves in contested waters, not just in the Arctic, but in the South China Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean, and other regions where maritime law is ambiguous and enforcement is weak. Because what happened today is not just about 47 ships. It's about whether the rules-based international order can function when a major power decides to rewrite the rules in real time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, share this, and stay alert. Don't let anyone tell you this doesn't matter, because it does. This is a shift, and shifts like this don't reverse themselves. We'll keep following it. You should too.